Hello to everyone, wherever in the world you might be. I know that we have people across the US, but I think also from elsewhere. So welcome. This is the fourth and final lecture for the summer program of the i3 lecture series. And I'm really delighted to welcome Jerry Takigawa. Jerry is a photographer, he's a designer, and he is a writer. He's the recipient of many photography awards and accolades, including the Imogen Cunningham Award, the Clarence John Laughlin Award, the Center's Curator's Choice Award, and the Rhonda Wilson Award. And in fact, those accolades continue because just this past week or so, he was named the recipient of the inaugural Photo Forum Santa Fe Photography Award. So congratulations, Jerry. His work is represented in a number of permanent collections, including the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Brooklyn Museum, the Santa Barbara Museum, the Library of Commerce, among many, many others. He's exhibited widely in numerous group and solo exhibitions across the United States, and I believe those exhibitions date from 1969, so quite a long record there. Upcoming exhibitions actually include an exhibition at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. It's an exhibition called Shadows of the Past, Sansai Artists and the American Concentration Camps. That's a really important show, and it will be opening in September. Additionally, he will have a solo exhibition at Photo Forum Santa Fe, which will be opening in August. I should just mention as well that the Center for Photographic Art in Carmel in California recently had a really fantastic show of Jerry's work, which spanned 40 years of his creative practice. So I'm not sure if that's documented on their website, but if it is, it's certainly worth looking up and having a look at. Recently, Jerry also launched his book, Balancing Cultures, which was published by Deo Press. And that's available as both a trade version, and also there's a limited edition that comes with a print that's available in an edition of 50. So I have that book here. I'll show it again at the end. That's my copy off my shelf. It's a really fabulous book, which I'm sure Jerry will say something more about later. So Jerry, welcome to the i3 lecture series, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Tom, also. Let's see. You made it sound so good. I mean, anyway, you know, it has been a long time making art for me. And I can start by saying, you know, this long career of making images, that in my very early days, I was so compelled to try to say something with my work. And at the same time, I really, you know, I was perplexed about what that was. And I think now I understand more that I first needed to really know who I was before I could even speak on issues outside of myself. And, you know, making a difference in the world begins kind of with the question, who am I? And that always begs for another question, which is, who are you? And it's all because we see others as we see ourselves. So ultimately, I would say my life has been really a search for missing pieces that I needed to feel whole. So as a fine art photographer, really my work is personal. And by that, I mean, it's work I have feelings about. And I think I like to say all photography is self-portraiture, because it's something that I'm in all the pictures I take, and it's really up to me to read those signs. There's some evidence that we've been making art for a long time, you know, well over 64,000 years. So I often think, why is it so important for us to make things for others to see? We live today in a world that is sort of truth optional, and I think it's important that, so many things are on the chopping block and they're all interconnected. And I think that it's important to have a little place to understand, some truths that we can hold on to. And I think artists have a really important role to play in today's crazy world. And I kind of rest in the idea that if that all the work that we do is a balance, if not an antidote to the madness we experience. It's kind of what keeps me going. So 10 things I know to be true today. So if you do it for personal reasons, the big change the world reasons usually take care of themselves. I think of personal as vulnerable, and vulnerability allows me to be seen. Number 2, trust your intuition. Your gut is intelligent, and I say trust it and don't discount it. Pay attention to those nudges that you have. The more you use it, the better it gets. Frankly, there's a lot of easier ways to make money, but we're all here, and I think we're doing it for other more important reasons. I think part of the job is to find out why we make art. For me, it's more important to be taken seriously as an artist than necessarily having economic success. So technology can be a bridge to meaning and authenticity, but try not to get stuck on the bridge. Ansel Adams once said, there's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept. And I would say without meaning, art is a commodity. Five, knowing where you're going is overrated. In 1817, John Keats coined the phrase negative capability. By this, he meant it's a person's ability to tolerate uncertainty. Uncertainty allows room for unexpected possibilities. The art of uncertainty I would call surrender. And if you're not a little uncertain, there'd be no decisions to make. Artists don't retire. My favorite answer to the question, why do you make art, has always been, I can't help it. And I have asked a lot of artists that question. Much that is human is not easily expressed in language. Our feelings live deep in our nonverbal part of our brain, and they translate really well into metaphor, but you need to dig really deep. Photography is a visual language, and everybody kind of has their own dialect. So I would say learn yours well and then say something you believe with it. Photography is too important to leave the photographers. I see our culture as steeped in consumerism, and I think we do it well, if you think like one-click purchase, but consumerism is passive, and I think it's our job, or my job anyway, to engage audiences and make them interact with my work in some way, not just passively view the work. Kind of want to make audiences feel and think and act. 9, no surprise for the artist, no surprise for the audience. If it's not new for you, it won't be new for your audience. And there's a certain creative sweet spot between familiarity and novelty, or predictability and surprise. So as an artist, your truth, your version of things, your own self, those are the things that you have to offer. It's your own first person experience of life, and no one else has that. So I would say that's where the magic comes from, and just be yourself because everyone else has been taken. So let's look at some images. Some of my early work was concerned with motion because my fascination with quantum mechanics. And also I have a background in drawing and painting, and that comes into play quite a bit. These figure studies incorporate what I call neo-figurative compositions, influenced by people like Richard Diebenkorn. And the blurs are kind of an expression of solid matter, only appearing to be solid. These are also very subtly hand colored. So for me, they also felt like drawings. Same process, looking in color and looking underwater. Kind of the freedom from sharp focus was liberating in these early days. These images really deal primarily in color, light, and form and time. They're not really, I don't know, I wouldn't consider them work that I was trying to inform people with content so much. This next series were made at a time when everything I did was trying to be an experiment. And so wanting the results to be a surprise was the goal. I started shooting from moving cars and still working with that metaphor of motion and the idea that solid objects were actually particles in motion. I used a strobe with the motion to help hold some detail. Eventually, I realized I could just move the camera, and I eliminated the need for a car and a driver. These shadows, they're kind of ghostly, were created by the motion, strobe, and long exposure combination. It's kind of as if the sky was a big backdrop. In an interview, an American photographer once, I jokingly said that this was the largest backdrop I could find. And they got letters from readers asking where they could get this backdrop. Visually, this work is interesting to me. Still, it's primarily about form and technique. So after 15 years of wrestling with what I wanted to say, I guess putting in my 10,000 hours, making images that demonstrated I was competent with the technique, the Kimono series was a quantum leap. And it became work that was maybe the first work that was really, truly personal to me. Kimono series involved making images more than finding images. So I always allowed myself to have the equipment I wanted when I was doing photography. But I think the real advancements in my work didn't come from advances in my equipment. It really came from my own personal growth. Wanted to put more of myself into my photographs. And ironically, in the end, it's my photographs that help me see who I am. Losing yourself in your work can mean finding yourself in your work too. To use kimonos, Japanese fabrics, was the first time I used visual symbols from my Japanese heritage. I was kind of owning being Japanese American with this work. In 1982, Martha Casanave nominated me for the Imogen Cunningham Award for this work. And I was fortunate enough to win that. And this was the first time color work had been recognized for this award. The award was presented by Imogen's son, Rondell Partridge, at Ruth Asawa's home in San Francisco. Ruth was a neighbor of mine when I was a student at San Francisco State University. And I used to go to her house and ask questions, talk about art and life, and she would be working and drawing. It'd been 15 years since we'd seen each other. After the ceremony, she took me aside and said to me in a kind of a typical Japanese reserve, "It's a nice beginning." And at the time, I kind of felt it was a real pinnacle for me. And I think Ruth's experience perspective was really quite true in that it was simply a nice beginning. In 1982, my partner, Claudette Divert, died in an accident, and she too was a photographer. And she helped me make some work, and she was a teacher. She taught me a lot of things. We did a lot of collaborations, and after she died, I spent a few years not making art and doing therapy, men's groups, and spiritual work. I noticed that while I was learning to communicate in an intimate way, it kind of reduced the drive to express my feelings in art. And by the time I was ready to come back, Landscapes of Presence was the work that kind of relaunched my art making. So this work on a trip to Hawaii, my wife was resting on a floral bedspread while she was wearing a floral robe. And so I added the flower lei. What's meaningful for me was the idea of presence, and that's kind of working in the moment intuitively. That's a process that I use whenever I make art. I was also fascinated by time and why felt like it was speeding up. So in this series, I'm kind of saying slow down and feel the presence I feel when I'm making these images. It was also a return to studio work and still life. And although you can control everything in still life, I enjoyed the process of combining these things, the elements, purely intuitively, kind of by gut feel. Japanese patterns still being represented here. I was attracted to the pattern on pattern and flattening of perspective. Black and white kind of made the Japanese fabric much more abstract and less literal. In Japanese or Eastern cultures, foreground and background are considered together as one and not seen separately. In the West, we see a subject and a background. The Western point of view is more about separation, and the Eastern point of view is more about wholeness. So I continued getting nudges from my subconscious to work with family history images. And I realized that blurring the background in the language of photography created a sense of depth. It also represented time. And it was a past that was fading, much like my memories do. So picturing my own family in artwork that I wanted to exhibit publicly was new for me. I had previously used symbols such as kimonos and Japanese artifacts, but this was much more literal, direct, and it just felt more vulnerable. They seemed to have a universal appeal, even though they were about my family. This is a picture of my father. This is my mother. And this is my wife's grandmother. So I was watching a documentary on TV once about the Monterey Bay Aquarium, which is just down the street here. A volunteer was holding up a glass jar, and it was filled with little bits of colorful plastic. And she explained that this plastic had been recovered from the belly of a dead albatross on Midway Atoll. And the albatross mistook it for food in the water. Eventually starved to death because it didn't allow for real food, any room for any real food. Sort of immediately, I kind of knew what I wanted to do with that plastic, and I asked the aquarium if I could borrow it and use it for this project. The aquarium exhibit staff calls this gut plastic because it's, you know, retrieved from the birds. And each year there's something like 8 million tons of plastic that finds its way into the oceans. So I didn't really want to proliferate horrific images of ocean plastic pollution. I wanted to make something transformative, something that didn't frighten and deaden consciousness, but rather elevated it. So I learned that when a race car driver is moving at 200 miles an hour, the driver doesn't look for obstacles because there's a tendency to steer into what you're looking at. Instead, he looks for open space. To bring awareness to plastic pollution and the albatross, I wanted to make aesthetic images. So it was my way to represent the open space and not the obstacle. Ironically, they do make plastic sushi displays in Japanese restaurants. So in this case, working with a limited color palette of plastic, it integrated really well with an old Japanese screen. It's kind of like the old world facing a new problem. It's that space between the familiar and the unexpected. So gathering dots then increases our chances of creating new ideas. Dots can be interesting life experiences, and you can't really make interesting work unless you're interested in something. This is a story about following your intuition. And I could ask, have you ever been compelled to photograph something, but you didn't really know why? So I made images. I made these images for over 10 years, and the working title was 50-50. They all divided the frame equally into two parts that in a single exposure, showing two different worlds in one image. And at first I kind of thought, well, maybe these are like parallel universes. This image was taken at the Huntington Gardens in Pasadena. But much later, I came to see them from another point of view because of my Japanese American upbringing. I realized I saw the world differently. This is a ferry boat on the Puget Sound. I began to view these images as representing two worlds in a single frame, sort of like the synthesis of the Eastern and Western cultures I grew up in. And it's also the same thing that all immigrant offspring face. They're always straddling two worlds. This is the United Terminal, Denver Airport. So it's an east-west point of view, or like I said, maybe parallel universes. This is a cemetery at the Big Island in Hawaii. So really nothing's original except the Big Bang, but there is such a thing as unique combination. And one thing creativity and the imagination create when they create something new it would be called recombination. And this is kind of like taking taxis and the internet and then coming up with Uber. So false food takes on a different dimension or an added dimension when combined with the 50-50 images. Another quick backstory, this is an example of a Japanese senbari belt from World War II. It's consisting of 1,000 French knots stitched by one knot per community member, and it's for good fortune when someone goes into battle. I often wondered about my attraction to the use of grid patterns, and it could be traced to my graphic design practice, but subconsciously it could also reference that senbari belt as kind of an amulet of protection. The grid pattern overlaying the organic image just felt right to me. And I don't really question when something feels right. I shoot first and ask questions later. Maybe subconsciously, I felt we needed protection from our own acts. At the end of the day, we kind of live in a very disposable society, and it's also a very closed ecosystem. And that means what we throw away, we ultimately consume. By drinking, by eating, and by breathing. Unlike organic debris, plastic doesn't biodegrade. It photodegrades into smaller and smaller pieces, absorbing toxins such as BPA until it becomes a soup of molecular plastic. Again, all these little artifacts are retrieved from birds. And I'll want to call your attention to the light bulb in the center that somehow survived being scooped up by an albatross. At this size, the molecular soup, it enters the food chain. And we become the albatross. So false food is representing the idea that although, colorful and fun, plastic harbors a hidden danger. And the photographs of false food mirror this paradox by telling a tragic story through images that are aesthetic. And I actually believe that aesthetics help to keep these stories alive. Even in an environmental project, I introduce these family history pictures. Although these images symbolize the threat of plastic pollution to all humans, I think this recurring family theme for me was my subconscious testing my courage to do a much more personal project. So photography means writing with light, and it's a visual language. Maybe it's imprecise, but it's still very powerful. And once we agree that it's language and we become proficient at it, we can decide what it is we want to say. Humans are kind of hardwired to respond to stories. And for centuries, stories have been really the glue that holds human culture together, creates coherence and meaning in our lives. So photography is a rather relational medium. And I know photographers who feel that they have nothing to say, and I would respectfully disagree. I mean, at the very least, they're saying, look at this. And a photograph elevates a specific moment. And with a little craft, it can do much more. So every decision we make as photographers has implications. The color, form, focus, composition, exposure, focal length, it's like a writer using words, plots, and character. We all use tools that enhance what we're trying to say. So when you're speaking in the truest, most intimate voice about your life, you're speaking with the universal voice. Cheryl Strayed. Intimate is universal, and I know it sounds contradictory, but intimate, if we recall, also means vulnerable, and we like vulnerability, especially when it's in somebody else. So in other words, the more personal you get, the more universal your message is. And I think all within appropriate boundaries. Your artistic growth and your personal growth are really one and the same. And lately, I've been experiencing this firsthand through my current project, Balancing Cultures. It was an extremely difficult project, story to tell, took a lot of vulnerability on my part, and maybe it's because of the scarcity, but I think the world is really hungry for truth. So I did this project really to understand myself better, and why my parents were silent for 40 years, really, about the concentration camps they were in. I wanted to give expression to that story. And if we can't see where we've been historically, for many of us, it's hard to understand where this whole thing ends up. And where we end up is a really important thing. So shortly after the inception in 2016, this work merged with mainstream news. And as you know, its anti-Asian subtext is still relevant today. So with this work, I'm expressing things I believe my ancestors couldn't express, for the threat of shame and retribution. The series began when I first saw photographs of my parents in the Jerome, Arkansas concentration camp. This is an example of one of the camp photos my brother and I found after our mother passed. Until I saw these images, camp was really just another word in my mom's conversations. It was a marker of time, in a sense, or a place, in a sense that she would say, yeah, we met them in camp, or a marker of time, it happened before camp or after camp. And as a visual person, seeing these photographs really made them real for me. The tar paper barracks, immediately signaled camp. And the text in this image is referring to two loyalty questions that the government asked the prisoners. And it was an affront to them because they were incarcerated without due process. So to ask about their loyalty was really an insult. The safe answers in this case were yes and yes. And that's why it's titled Yes and Yes. This was actually the first image in this series. I knew I wanted to use text-based elements in this series. In this case, the text, very shredded, is from the well-known Instructions to All Persons of Japanese Ancestry poster. If I look back, I remember how nervous I was to show this image to somebody for the first time. My grandmother, pictured at top, was a picture bride. When she arrived in America, she rejected her suitor for my grandfather. Fortunately, all parties remained friends. Looking at the past is like time travel. It's useful, especially if it creates a better future. And I hope it does help us. This is a newspaper clipping from a magazine called This World. It's dated February 8, 1942, and it's just 11 days before the signing of EO 9066. And it reads, "The great majority of our aliens are harmless people, desperately anxious to keep out of trouble and to abide by our laws." It's Senator Sheridan Downey, Democrat, California. So racism against the Japanese Americans on the West Coast was a long-established jealousy of their commercial success in industries such as fishing and agriculture. After Pearl Harbor, war hysteria kind of amplified that hostility. This is my grandfather's fish market on Fisherman's Wharf before the war. Gaman, in the tiles in this picture, means bearing the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity. Growing up, with my parents encouraged me to be American and become educated so that I would be safe. Through their silence, they protected me from the truth of what actually happened to them. But silence is a powerful transmitter of trauma, and there's no statute of limitations for emotional trauma. Immediately following Pearl Harbor, community elders were sent to military prisons. My grandfather was sent to a military prison in Bismarck, North Dakota. The Japanese kanji in this image, which was written in his address book, reads, "The head of the household has been arrested in Louisiana, who is going to support the family." His address book was filled with messages from fellow prisoners as they were being separated and transferred to different camps. When families were transported to the camps, their family names became a number, and my family went to Arkansas by train with the shades drawn and accompanied by armed guards. I think for months, my mother didn't know where her father had been sent. And she was afraid they would all be executed. I had to recreate the ID tags for this image, but the family numbers are their numbers. J. Takigawa was held for possession of 2 red signal lights and a navigational chart, Monterey Bay. This is a quote from the Monterey Herald, and J. Takigawa is my father, shown center in the back row. without a hat. Intuitively, I just wanted to make original or origami boats out of the navigational charts and signal that the contraband was actually harmless. After the war, my ancestors' shame and their silence turned into a shadow legacy for the next generation, my generation, or the Sansei. Many became the model minority, while some sought resolution to their ancestors' suffering, some politically and some artistically. I believe these images bring humanity to the historical record, and I think that facts require testimony to be remembered. Shame is the feeling of being flawed. And in the context of World War II, flaw was being Japanese. In the text in this photo reads, "A Jap's a Jap, it makes no difference whether he's an American citizen or not." And this is Lieutenant John DeWitt, Commanding General of the Western Defense Command. The Japanese were not really incarcerated for anything they did. They were incarcerated for who they were. Excuse me. So 120,000 Japanese were incarcerated in 10 concentration camps throughout the US without due process. My grandmother was a chef, and so I'm not surprised to see her in a photograph with the kitchen staff. She's just to the right of the word like. In Scrabble, there's only one case, so I had to use the blank tile for the second like. But maybe there's a little truth in the resulting like goes with lie. Ironically, two of my uncles served in the military. Really, to prove their loyalty, many Nisei second generation Japanese Americans served in the military to show their loyalty to the country while their families were imprisoned by the government. My uncle here visiting his mother in camp, the word shikataganai is another Japanese saying that means it cannot be helped. And that's a phrase that was repeated often in the camps. This is my mother shown with her brother, consistent with the PR to the very end. The War Relocation Authority is still referring to the concentration camps as a relocation center. These cards were issued to my parents when they left the camps to employment they found in Chicago. By this time, the Japanese were totally exonerated of any wrongdoing, and there were 0 incidents of sabotage or fifth column activity. So I would question, was the mugshot really necessary? It really feels as though they were still seen as criminals. After the war in 1945, a petition with 440 signatures, including notably Edward Weston and John Steinbeck, was submitted to the Japanese American Citizens League in Monterey. This is to welcome the Japanese Americans home to Monterey. This was not really a typical response in California, and in that sense, Monterey was a sanctuary city for the Japanese. In 1980, Congress concluded race prejudice, war, hysteria, and a failure of political leadership were the primary causes that led to the executive order. So it really was not military necessity as originally argued. The incarceration of the Japanese was deemed a grave mistake. It was a combination of my parents passing and then the discovery of these camp photos that gave me permission to speak out. This is not easy because it was a betrayal of my parents' original wish for me to not make waves. But in a democracy, that's our responsibility to speak out. If silence sanctions, then documentation is resistance. The Sansei generation carried and is still carrying the feelings our parents could not. Much of my life was spent trying to understand and express these mysterious feelings that motivated my behavior in my life and my art. Here at age 5, I'm returning to my parents' birthplace in Monterey to begin my journey sorting out these post-war psychological traumas. And that's my attempt at a haiku. Art really is a mirror, an opportunity for understanding, and a window that opens minds. There's a sociologist, Alfred McClung Lee, who said in 1946, all Americans are members of minorities. Almost all of these minorities have at one time or another been factioned off and persecuted. So this image speaks to the traumatic Japanese-American experience during the war, all the traumas that were placed on the shoulder of the next generation. I wanted to share a few spreads from my book, Balancing Cultures. As Deborah said, it's self-published through Dio Press. It's a short-run book focusing more on design and craftsmanship. And this is the cover. And you can find the book online through diopress.com or my website, takigawaphoto.com. The foreword is written by my friend John Hamamura. He's a writer and wrote, I've known him since high school, and he wrote the novel Color of the Sea, which is about his family's history through World War II. It's a long form poem, and when I first read it, it touched me deeply. I felt really seen, and it speaks to his ability as a writer. In the preface, I describe the genesis, the process, and influences involved in creating the project. Photograph section loosely sequences the 43 images in a general chronology of memory. So the book is technically sewn and glued with an exposed spine, allowing the images of the pages to lay flat when opened. A dust jacket wraps the book block and covers the spine. Excuse me, this bindery format is great for crossovers. That's when one image spans both pages. And there's a limited edition book and print set, and this is the photograph being offered. And that again, you can find on diopress.com. So being able to do nice crossovers is really a pleasure because it doesn't confine the horizontals to a single page. The book is printed stochastic, which is a 20 micron random dot, and that's equivalent to a 360 line screen, more than twice the resolution of standard printing. So as a designer, I've designed many books for other artists, writers, and publishers, but this was really an educational process for myself. And with all the travel issues, the borders being closed and such, I had to rely on a remote trust check. Another part of making this book was soliciting comments and endorsements from people I admire. There are a few here that are some short excerpts. George Takei is AKA Mr. Sulu. He was interned as a child in an Arkansas concentration camp. And when he says ghostly memories, I'm sure he has some real personal connection to that line. Lisa's commenting on my use of vernacular photography in a way that both highly personal and universal at the same time. So I had the pleasure of working with Anne on a panel discussion that I moderated for Delta College. She's president, CEO of the Japanese American National Museum, but also the chair of Amnesty International's Global Council. So definitely well-versed in the area of these issues. Paula has been a supporter of my work since we met, and I just love her direct approach. I first met Aline in Carmel at our one of our PI labs. PI is an acronym for Photography, Ideas, and Experience. It's a program that I founded in 2016 based on the premise that artistic growth is the same as personal growth. So it was not so much of a technical workshop, but a creative one. A lot of you know Anne. Anne is the tireless and prolific executive director of the Center for Photographic Art. She's to the point and always with feeling. Laura is referring to the tension set up again by images that are simultaneously beautiful and tragic. So you have to feel secure in yourself to be magnanimous towards others. I think it's time that this premise of being better than is maybe discarded. I just want to say that all art has the power to change the way we see and the way we think, opening new doors to new possibilities. And Balancing Cultures is the most personal project I've done to date, and it was really healing and revealing to me. Ultimately, I believe that healing the world begins by healing ourselves. And if true change is to be achieved in our country, it will be through the kind of deep spiritual and emotional understanding that art can foster. So I think, thank you for my 1 hour here. I think I'm on time. Thanks for your time and attention.
Jerry, thank you so much. I have to say, I'm in a state of speechlessness. What an incredible presentation. And, you know, I think from my perspective, what you said at the very beginning, that creativity comes from losing yourself in your work, and by losing yourself, you find yourself. I think that is such a profound statement to make about artwork, and the fact that you also mentioned when you ask people, why do you make art? And the answer is because I can't help it. It all kind of ties in together. I feel that, you know, true artists have a calling. And I see that in the breadth of your work and the way you speak about it. So thank you. I mean, this was a very enlightening presentation, and I'm completely blown away by it.
No, thank you.
We haven't actually got any questions yet from the audience, and I suspect that is because everyone else is blown away. So I'm glad I have a few questions to start off the conversation. One of the interesting things is going back to that statement about losing yourself in your work, and that your work basically comes out of making. I noticed that really there's a real common thread through your work from the very beginning pieces through to the balancing cultures, where you're working with this this foreground and this background, the flattening of the perspective, really training the eye of the viewer as well to question what they're looking at. We see that certainly within the Landscapes of Presence series, where you were working with the strobe light and the movement of the camera. So it looked like these branches were kind of these surreal objects in front of a backdrop. I'm wondering if throughout your career as an artist, whether you, whether you saw those threads appearing and whether you at some point had some consciousness of that and then started to actually exploit those aesthetics and that manner of working?
You know, it's been a long journey to this point, and I mean, you know, it's a cliche, but hindsight is 2020, and you can see that thread if you look at it today, and I can see that thread, but I don't know that it was so perfectly clear, and that thread is not ended yet, in my opinion, and so I again still don't know what may be next on that line, but they are all kind of springing from each other in a way. They emerge, you know, one emerges from the one that's before it, and all I can say is, you know, it really is about following nudges.
Yeah, and you spoke as well about instinct as well, which I think really comes to play as well when you started the Balancing Cultures project, because you were very much going against the grain or against the wish of your parents, but instinctively kind of wanting to move forward with it.
Yeah. I think I assume they might. You know, a friend of mine said, yeah, sometimes it's easier to do that kind of project after they're gone, because of the, you know, the way they felt about the whole thing. But I think in hindsight, I would say, you know, they would still be proud of it, and because I think it was maybe what they felt anyway.
Indeed, and I think the other thing that you really bring to bear with that project is something else that, I mean, you spoke about how if you do something very personal, it becomes universal.
Yeah.
And I think within that story as well is something that you share with other generations of people who've experienced other types of trauma that is also similar. So, for example, children of the Holocaust survivors talk about how they experience a trauma in like a secondary trauma, and that seems to be something that I'm picking up that is very prevalent as well within your generation, where you've have this family history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a parallel there, definitely.
Yeah, and so interestingly as well, the project Balancing Cultures has garnered a lot of attention, and it seems like it's taken on a life of its own. And I wonder how responsible you feel with this project now, or if you feel a different type of responsibility because it's no longer just your story. And I wonder if you've had to think about what you might want its legacy to be. That's a tough one, I know.
Yeah, it is a tough one because, you know, because I'm in the middle of it, and it's hard to have that perspective. But, you know, I also am involved in co-curating a group of Japanese artists who are all doing work in the same, with the same, you know, story behind it. And we created an exhibition called Resilience, and it is it's going to be toured by Midwest Arts Alliance I guess, a 5-year tour through different galleries and museums. And so there's all this stuff going on in the background. And I'm fascinated by the other artists. It's sort of a little bit like the Close Encounters thing of everybody building the Devil's Tower mountain out of the way. It's everybody doing work around the same story, and it's a powerful story. And it took a certain amount of time for it to be allowed to be told. But I still don't know. I learn more about it all the time.
For sure.
Yeah. On, about myself and about the bigger picture. We're doing. Oh, by the way, that exhibition you were previewing, Shadows from the Past, that's actually at the Monterey Museum of Art. So I think you said Santa Barbara. So.
Oh, did I? I'm sorry. Yeah, it's the Monterey Museum of Art. My mistake. So there is a question from the audience, and the question is coming from the Trinidad and Tobago Photographic Society. Hi, guys, and thank you. We know that you have been a constant audience member or members during this program. And the question is, can you speak on how you arrived at the moment of combining the false food and the 50-50 image?
I have to go back. It was a project before the one I'm immersed in right now, but it like I said in the slideshow, I had done that. I'd been doing that work, and it was open-ended. I didn't know quite what I wanted to do with it, and I didn't maybe think it was complete unto itself. And I was at a point where I had maybe done a lot of backgrounds for the plastic, and I was thinking about new ideas for backgrounds. And somehow that came up. I don't remember how I pulled out an image and thought, I would like to see what happened when I did this. It was one of those random intuitive nudges that just put it together. And then once I did one, it was easy to do others. So
I think that's what we call happy accidents. Yeah.
It was the idea that something started before I knew how I was going to use it.
Right.
You just start doing it,
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it because, of that voice in your head that says, shoot that. Look for those things.
Yeah.
And I really do like, I guess I can't emphasize enough that, trusting your intuition because, photography is so much about what do I point the camera at. And
indeed, yeah. And I wondered, did you also apply that intuition and instinct when it came to the book on balancing cultures? We have a question from Elizabeth Avedon in the audience, who has asked about how you felt while you were laying out your book, and I guess that's because you designed the book yourself, you've self-published it. You could have worked with third parties like a publisher, etc. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it took longer than doing a book for someone else, and that usually takes quite a long time. But it just took a long time because I don't know. I guess it was so personal that it was hard to, it was hard to translate it into a book. I had to sequence the images first. That was probably one of the biggest things. And it's not trying to be a literal narrative, but it's kind of loose memory kind of a way of putting it together. So it's personal in how it's sequenced. And I must have done well over 50 different versions of a cover design. And when you look at the cover, so hardly anything there that you would wonder why would I have to do so many. But, it's that's what design is, I guess. It's like, you know, trying many things and being able to see the best, and that part of the process is, out of 50 designs, how do you choose one? So, you know, that again is the same intuition that you point your camera at. You know, it's like, I feel this is the right one. You know, it just works. And there were other ones that sat out on my desk for a long time and didn't make the cut, basically.
Yeah, one of the things about the book, which I think works incredibly well, is that the Balancing Cultures series is a very understated, very quiet project. And I think that you spoke about that with the other work as well, about the environment, where you're not really wanting to kind of throw things in people's face and be aggressive with any message. The thing that's really interests me about the book is that you don't have any page numbers. And the effect that that has for me is that when you page through the book, you kind of page back and you page forward, and you kind of revisit pages, and then you might skip a few and go to some others. I wonder if that is something that you thought about, because it makes me think about memory and how we kind of scoot back and forth with our memories. You know, we might remember little details and then others come through.
Well, I think that's a pretty good read on the idea. I mean, it didn't need page numbers, and you know, it's the Zen process is all about what you can take away. So, you know, we didn't need them, and I like the way you interpreted the result of, you know, you're not trying to do a linear thing. It's memory, and memory comes in funny ways, and it's all part of, I'm still sorting it out. I mean, the forward that my friend John wrote, you know, has to do with piecing puzzles together. And that's kind of what life is. You know, you're putting these pieces together, trying to figure out who I am.
Yeah.
You know?
And yeah, I mean, the other thing I was just going to ask you as well is, have you thought about whether you might want the book published in the future in Japanese? Because I'm just wondering about how the audience for this might actually expand, because you've gone from this very highly personal project. You've spoken very eloquently about how by being very personalized, you can be more universal. And I'm wondering whether, and the fact that this has kind of grown outside of you, whether it might actually grow further, and whether you've thought about that.
Yeah, there are a couple of people I know that I could kind of bounce that idea off of. I think it's it's been suggested that, you know, what am I selling it in Japan? And I have, you know, I'm still, partly because of COVID, everything moves so slowly, but I'm still working on this country, and we got Canada involved. But yeah, I think it would be interesting to find out what that audience thinks. You know, I think it's true. I don't know if they're interested in that story.
Yeah. I do have someone who has just wanted to say something. This is coming from Lynette Wong, and she says, it's really a comment, really. She says, "Thank you for your talk. I'm not an artist or photographer, but work with children who have experienced trauma. I appreciated your comment that silence is a powerful transmitter of trauma. I'm also inspired by your comment that photography is writing with light. I'm inspired to begin writing."
Hey, wow, that's a good outcome.
It's beautiful.
Thank
yes.
you.
Thank you, Lynette. That's really wonderful. You know, we don't have any more questions coming up in the feed. Let me just see. There is someone else. Ed Sang says, "What was the moment or spark that got you wanted to tell the story and feelings? How did your family respond to opening the family story? Also, what recommendations would you make to others like me to make a story? You have wonderfully and artfully showed history, historical records and remarks, past and present. Thank you for sharing.
Well,
that's a long one, so
yeah.
some advice I think there as well.
Well, I mean, as if you look at that arc of work, and starting with kimonos, I mean, that was my dipping my toe in the water of saying it was okay to be Japanese, and working my way all the way across, trying different things, and it's I think you said it, and it's true that you kind of have to make a lot of work to kind of see what you want to do. In a way, it's almost it's an irony. It's like it's you have to do it in order to know, and then you find out what's next, and the next is sort of gets closer and closer to maybe what you're really supposed to be doing in life. And unfortunately, and I don't know that there's any way around it, that there may not be any shortcuts to getting to that, what you're supposed to be doing. The better you are at following your intuition and nudges, I think you'll get there quicker if you really do pay attention to them. But, doing that project, I went, was 2 years before I even started shooting. I knew I was going to do that project, but I thought about it for 2 years because it was like, something that it seemed unheard of at the time for me to do it.
Right. Yeah.
But, it just kept, it had to be done. It just kept, and more and more things. And then discovering the images of my parents in the camps kind of pushed me over the edge. And it was like, okay, this is real. I think I'm going to do something with this now.
Yeah. So it became very compelling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we do have another question from Sal Tanaka, and she's kind of coming back to this, asking a question about audience. So she says, thank you so much for your presentation and your beautiful work. Do you have a particular audience you want to deliver your project to about the immigration camps? And she's asking this because she assumes that the historical issue wouldn't necessarily be known in Japan. So she's kind of asking if you yourself have an audience in mind.
That's what I would assume too, that the audience in Japan may not be connected to that story. It's a different country, but if I don't know, I mean, it's just, but it is still, a part of their country in some way. Mm-hmm. What was the rest of that? There was another part of that question.
Yeah, I'm just going back to it. Sorry, I scrolled down while you were talking. She's asking because she assumes, she wants to know if you have a particular audience that you want to reach.
Yeah. When I did that project, I don't think I have specific, I mean, the audience is the big world, because, I would just soon everybody hear about it. But primarily it was being done because, like we say, I can't help it. It has to be done. Mm-hmm. And I think, when you do it from that point of view, when you do it from the point of view that you can't help it, you're just going to do it, and you're doing it for yourself and for very personal reasons, I think that holds a lot of energy and power that, like has a life of its own that's going to go beyond you. I mean, those are the things that, the more you plan it, it's sort of much more of a marketing plan, and it ends up hitting a segment of the world. But when you do something that's personal and vulnerable, I think it is universally human.
Indeed. And so it's almost like the work finds its audience. You don't necessarily have to predetermine that.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, people, whether they knew about the story or they didn't know about it, they're all kind of touched and moved inside in their hearts. And that's, that's kind of a great outcome for me.
Yeah. So your work is really inspiring, and I know that it's inspiring many people in the audience. And in fact, we do have a question here from someone in the audience. It didn't come directly to me, but it's about inspiration. And the question, it's from someone called Julie Lee. Hi, Julie. And she's asking the question, the framework throughout is just so strong and really amazing. I was wondering if you would be willing to share any writers or artists who help inform your work and your theories. And she also just said, what a great lecture, and thank you. So which writers and artists and theorists are inspiring you?
Well, early on, I started out in painting and drawing. So that was like Richard Diebenkorn and Elmer Bischoff, people that were doing these figurative big paintings that I loved. And so the figure studies that I showed in the beginning kind of are that. It's me trying to do those drawings. But in photography, there's Wynn Bullock. Wynn Bullock is somebody that I met when I was in college, and I know her, his daughter Barbara. She and I went to school together, and he was showing that you could make images of ideas, and it wasn't just images of just rock and tree. And he had these elaborate kind of frameworks and narratives about his work, and that was kind of that opened some doors for me. But photography wise, there are a lot of photographers I love, and the way I kind of evaluate work is, gosh, I wish I had done that, that kind of thing. But I don't, I don't know. I think what I do, because I came from a fine arts background and moved into photography, I feel like in the fine arts world, you really do strive to have your own voice and be different. And in so much of the photography world, it seems like people emulate for a long time. And the things end up being, just great examples of somewhat, derivative work. And I don't know, I guess it's safer. And maybe a lot of people enter photography because of the technology or something. I have no desire to know more about technology. So, that's why I created the Pi Labs, because it was all about creativity and ideas, and it was not about technology so much.
Right. So I do have another question for you, and then we're going to wrap up. So this is coming from the chair of our program, Tom Ash. He says, thank you for an inspiring talk, Jerry. I really appreciate your process of combining serious topics with aesthetic beauty, as with false food and balancing cultures. This allows your viewer to come to importance more naturally and in an unexpected way. I'm guessing some of this for you comes from your background as a designer. How has your work as a designer influenced your photography?
Yeah, well, it's the same person. So I have to say that I'm sure it's influencing it, to a great extent. And also, that idea of, I don't know if I can make, well, like Paula said, do something that's about a tragedy without baring teeth. But I think I can say that there's the strong Japanese aesthetic that still dominates both my design and my photography. And I don't want to make something that is not beautiful somehow.
Indeed, and you mentioned this calling to working with this a sense of grid work, and in your presentation you were also talking about wholeness and about separation, kind of creating, defining between Western and Eastern art, which I think really comes through in your work, and just that there's a real humbleness to the work as well, I think.
Well, it is, and also it is trying to bring those two worlds together into one person one piece of art, you know, those things exist.
Yeah.
Both of those things exist in everything that I'm doing. So I think that's in the end, you know, an idea of the better world. I mean, we don't necessarily have to keep things pure and separate, you know. They might as well take the best of everything and put it together.
Indeed, yes. Well, I would like to say once again, thank you so much for such an incredible talk. I have to say, I feel like, I feel impacted, and I will need to go and sit quietly for a while after tonight's presentation. So from the bottom of my heart, Jerry, thank you so much for such an amazing presentation.
Well, you're welcome. It wasn't. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry.
All right. Signing off from Canada.
Jerry.
Thank you very
And
much.
I just want to say also thank you to the whole audience for being here, and the team at SVA for always putting on such an amazing program of talks, making them free and available to everyone. And I reiterate and echo what Jerry has said, that, you know, art really is such a powerful tool and it can change the world. And I think that these talks also contribute to that. So thank you to the SVA team, Marco and Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for a great season.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Jerry. Good night.